So there's this cave woman, and outside of cave woman's cave is a plant. And this plant can be cooked and put into water and eaten. And this plant helps her and her family survive and sustain life. And also, caveman, there's these animals that live off of that plant and plants like that they're able to sustain life. And they've noticed something about the world that they live in. They've noticed that there's this kind of ball of light up in the sky. And sometimes this ball of light burns a little bit hotter. And on days that it burns a lot hotter, and for weeks and months that it burns a lot hotter, cave woman has noticed that the plant begins to die. And caveman, he noticed that when the ball of light burns a little bit hotter for a little bit longer, the watering holes there all the animals go begins to dry up. So cave woman and caveman have noticed something about their world, that their very lives are dependent upon forces bigger than them. So they've realized we need to speak to these forces and seek maybe the good pleasure of these forces. And they've realized something that no matter how hard they try, no matter what they do, no matter what sacrifices they make, the gods still seem angry. That there's nothing they can do to make these forces, to make these gods that they've begun to worship any happier. And that day began a search that humanity in many ways is still on today. It's framed by this question of, what is God like? I mean, what's he really like? Is he angry? And throughout antiquity, there was all these definitions and explanations for what God was like. And different civilizations and cultures worshiped different things, different deities, whether it's the sun or the stars or these made up gods, or maybe the Romans worshiped the deified emperors, the leaders of their nation. There was always this question of, what is God like? And over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about this, about what God is like. And we talked about in week 1 how many people kind of rejected the faith and religion that they were handed growing up. In fact, there's a term for these people. They call themselves nuns because they're not really affiliated with any one kind of religion. They just said, I'm kind of done with that. But the problem is, for so many nuns, for so many of those of you in this room that heard that message, is you can't really go all the way where that road leads, because that road leads, when you reject God, it leads to atheism. And atheism, the problem with that is there's some realities that you have to accept that you just can't live with. Ideas like there is no value, there is no meaning in life, there is no love. You can ascribe those things to your life. You can tell yourself you have meaning, but there really is no value and dignity in human life. It just doesn't exist. The problem is, many people have rejected faith. They've been rejected what they've been handed, but they kind of find themselves stuck in the middle because they can't quite go all the way to atheism. And last week, we talked about many of the gods that you've been handed growing up. The childhood faith that you were handed said things like, oh, God doesn't let bad things happen to good people. And you realized the problem is, bad things absolutely happen to good people. And we talked about that's not really a Christian faith, because Jesus, a really good person who a really bad thing happened to, wouldn't have said that and didn't say that. So we've talked about these childhood faiths that we've been handed, that we reject those things. And you know what? That's a good thing. If you rejected feelings-based God, if you rejected boyfriend God because the feelings aren't always there, good. But then we ended last week because there's kind of this problem. Because if you reject your childhood faith because you realize that that couldn't hang with the rigors of adult life, then what do? I mean, where do you go from there? If I can't go all the way to atheism, like Christianity's kind of burned for me, where do I go now? Well, I have an agenda today. I want to be real clear. Sometimes people are like, oh, the pastor has an agenda. Yeah, I've got an agenda. Absolutely. I have a goal. In fact, I want to be really transparent with all of you today. Even those of you who have rejected Christianity, even those of you here today that are a nun that says, man, I don't want to have anything to do with religion. I have an agenda and I have a goal for you. Is I would like you to reconsider Christianity. Here's the thing. I know what many of you are thinking. Some of you in this room, as soon as you heard reconsider Christianity, you kind of bristled a little bit. you thought, no, I'm done with that. I can't do that. I don't want to have anything to do with that because that's burned me, that's hurt me. And I've heard your stories. Several of you have written in and told us about what's happened and why you walked away from that. To which I say, no. That Christianity, that version that you were handed, I want you to walk away from that. But I want you to walk towards another version. Because, and I want to be crystal clear, the reason I want you to reconsider Christianity is in my opinion, what I think about Christianity is that the God of Christianity is so compelling, is so magnetic, and is so beautiful that if everyone saw it for what it was, they would embrace it. I genuinely believe this. I hang my entire life, everything I've hung it on this belief that I really believe that if you saw Christianity for what it truly was, for what it really was, it would be so compelling, so magnetic, so beautiful that everyone would go, I want that. I don't know the rest. I'm still confused by some things. There's still some things in the Bible I don't know, but I want what that is. That's my goal today. So to introduce you to this God of Christianity, I need to kind of fill you guys in on some things. This whole Christianity thing kind of revolves around this guy that's kind of a big deal to Christians, and his name's Jesus. A lot of this kind of rises and falls on this guy, right? So what I'd like to do is I would like to look at what Jesus says about God. So what does Jesus say God is like? I mean, if we're talking about Christianity, then we got to talk about Jesus. So I think a good start would be to say, well, what does Jesus say about God? Who does Jesus say God is? And so what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to look at eyewitness accounts of the words of Jesus and these interactions with Jesus and see what they said. You see, I'm not going to the Bible because it says it's God's word, so therefore it is God's words. No, because atheists are gonna go, that's such circular reasoning. That doesn't make sense. So I'm not saying let's look at the Bible because if the Bible said it, that settles it and I believe it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the Bible, the Gospels are eyewitness accounts of people who saw Jesus walk the earth and wrote down what he said. So let's just look at some eyewitness accounts. Let's just look at that. One of Jesus's followers, a guy by the name of John, a good friend of his, wrote this, and here's this interaction. This is Jesus speaking. Jesus says, if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So Jesus is saying, do you guys want to know what God is like? Jesus is like, okay, maybe I give him a parable, maybe I give him a story, maybe, no, I got this. Do you know what God is like? Look at my life. Because I'm gonna show you what God is like. And his followers are like, man, Jesus, like, you talk like you guys are close, but can you give us a little bit more? In fact, one of his followers, this guy named Philip, he says this. He says, Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. He's like, listen, you guys are close. I've heard you say that. Sure, yeah. But could you just show us God? I mean, could you give me a little bit more? And sometimes we like to dog on people like Philip and Thomas who had these doubts. But come on, let's be honest. How many of you have, oh God, give me a sign and I'll believe, right? You're like, God, just show me a sign. If you only show me a sign. And then you drive down a billboard and it says like Jesus on it and you're like, God, was that a sign? If it was, show me another one, And we're like, come on, like, I need something, right? And like, we're just like Philip. Philip's going, Jesus, I need a little bit more. Give me something else. And Jesus continues on. He says this. He says, Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I've been among you such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak of my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who's doing this. And here's the problem with a lot of Christians is we've heard stuff like this before. So it like goes right in one ear and out the other. And we're going, yeah, Jesus is just kind of reiterating. He's kind of doubling down. But if you do that, you miss something huge in this. Get this. Jesus says, the words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it's the Father who's doing this. So you know what Jesus is saying? Jesus is saying, you want to know what God is like? You want to know what God would speak to in regards to a certain issue? Anything I say, I'm not saying because it's my authority. This is God speaking through me. So you want to know what God would say about that? Listen to what I would say about that. You see, and the reason this is so important, the reason this is so big that we can't miss this, is because in Christianity, there are veins of theology that believe probably more similar to the caveman. There are beliefs about God that say, and come on, I've been there before. Growing up in the church, I've been there. That I think, man, I love Jesus. He seems awesome. But God, he's kind of scary, right? And we think like Jesus loves us, but God must be angry, right? Because we read the Old Testament and we're like, man, he was ticked, right? Like God was like just waiting to let the lightning bolts fly, right? Like, and we think that like Jesus loves us because God hates us, right? Like Jesus is like this, like diving in front of the bullet of God, like saving us, that like Jesus is like protecting us from this wrath of God because God's this angry, vengeful, I'm gonna get you, God. And if you better hope Jesus doesn't step in front of you because and there's that kind of theology in our lives. And we think, Jesus, yeah, he loves me, but God's angry. What's so important is what Jesus says about God is he says, if you wanna know what God says, listen to me. Do you wanna know what God would say? Listen to me. He goes further. He says, if you wanna know what God is up to, watch me. Watch me. You wanna know what God would do in this situation? You wanna know what God would be up to in culture and society right now? Watch me. And what I love this about Jesus, because the disciples are still like, I don't know, like they're still wrestling with this. Jesus goes on, he goes, okay. He says this. He says, believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father's in me. He's saying, listen, you just should believe me on this one. Or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Here's why this is important. Jesus says, okay, you don't want to believe me because I say, trust me on this one. I get it. To all you skeptics out there, to all you doubters out there that are going, well, you're just reading the Bible. That stuff's made up. Fine. Just logically look at it like this. Would you consider if the evidence of the works of Jesus are compelling, would you believe that God is like that for that reason? Would you go, let me look at the evidence of Jesus's life. Let me just look at his works. Let me look at some things and I don't know if I can buy it. I'm like Philip. I don't know if I can buy it just because you're saying it. Jesus says, fine. That's okay. Would you believe on the evidence of the works themselves? So, what are these works? What is Jesus like? Well, I want to start with a quick little history lesson. For those of you that love history, this will be good for you. You see, Jesus came in a time and a point in history into a place geographically where there's some specific things happening. He stepped into a Jewish world in which there were already Jewish leaders selecting disciples. Like if you thought Jesus was the only guy that had disciples, that's not the case. There were rabbis and teachers of religious law long before and after Jesus, and they would select their disciples. And they would have kind of their own bent, their own lean, their own take on theology, and they would want their point of view to continue on. They would want their ideology to continue. We talked about this a few weeks ago, that's called a yoke. A rabbi's teaching is called their yoke. So they would want their yoke to be handed down. So if I'm a great rabbi, and I think I've got it, like I think I've got this thing figured out, who do I want to pass my teaching on to? I want the best, don't I? Like I want the best of the best. I want the brightest minds, the sharpest people. I'm going to the Ivy Leagues. You know, if it's football, it kills me to say this, I go to the SEC. You know, like I would go to where get out of here. No, I would go I would pick the best of the best, right? Like that's who I would go to. And here's what would happen in that culture, in that society. So all the little boys, they all want to be teachers. They all want to grow up and be rabbis. So they grow up and they're memorizing things and they're learning things. And then they go to the rabbis and they would say, hey, could I be your follower? And the rabbi would quiz them and ask them all these questions. And they'd say one of two things. They would either say, come and follow me. Or they would say, no, listen, you're great. You're going to have a great family. But why don't you go work the trade of your father? Why don't you go learn the job that your family has and you go to that? And do you know what Jesus does? Guys, this is amazing. Jesus goes to people who are fishing, who are collecting taxes, who are doing everyday jobs. And what happens? Jesus goes up to them and does he say, would you like to say something to me? Do you want to ask, if you can follow me? Oh, Jesus goes to them and he says, would you come and follow me? Have you ever wondered why Peter's fishing, he's casting, and Jesus says, come and follow me, and he's like, done. Absolutely, I'll come. Because he's probably been rejected before. And he's gone back to that. No one's believed in him. No one saw that he had something more inside of him. But Jesus saw more in this ragtag group. These are the people that Jesus selected. Some ragtag group of guys that couldn't do anything. And beyond that, you know who else he picked? He picked people like, there's a guy by the name of Simon. He was a zealot. And what a zealot was, it was this religious ideologue that wanted Rome outside of Jerusalem, outside of Israel. They were basically nationalist terrorists. They were fighting guerrilla warfare on the Romans. And anyone who worked with the Romans was a traitor and had to be killed. I mean, that's a zealot. So Jesus picks one of those guys. That's pretty crazy, huh? And then you know who else he picks? He picks a tax collector. A Jewish tax collector. They were basically in bed with Rome. They were exploiting their own people for their own gain. So imagine Jesus going, hey, Simon and Matthew, why don't you come here? Yeah, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this together. I mean, can you imagine like the first meals, like Simon's just sitting there like, oh, I'm gonna get that Matthew guy. Like I'm gonna, and Matthew's like, oh, Jesus, can I leave now? I'm like, that's who Jesus picks. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that unreal? But I'm telling you, it gets better than that. Because you know who else Jesus selects? They're not listed in one of the 12 disciples, but if you read the Gospels, if you read the accounts of Jesus' life, for instance, do you know who funds Jesus' ministry? Do you know who pays for it, raises the money, handles the finances so that they can travel around and do all this stuff? Women. Yeah. Women, ladies, come on. Like Jesus is centuries ahead of culture and civilization. Jesus keeps raising up women saying, you are more capable. There's more than you can do. Like this culture and society says you're gonna be pushed down. Jesus keeps raising them up. In fact, so much so, you know who Jesus selects as the first person to see him after he raises from the dead? A woman, right? Do you know a woman's testimony in that day and age couldn't even hold up in court? If there was a witness on something and it was a woman, they wouldn't even consider it because they were considered unreliable. And then the most remarkable, unbelievable thing in human civilization, someone rose from the dead and Jesus says, I need some witnesses. I'm gonna select women. He's like thumbing his nose at culture and society that day. Jesus is so radically inclusive of this message. And then it continues on in the early church. The early church just keeps doing this. There's women that are leading house churches. There are women all across that are funding. One of the major funders of the early church was another businesswoman. I mean, it's crazy the degree to which Jesus in the early church steps out to the fringes of society to include and welcome people in. But then, what happens when you cross Jesus, right? Like what happens when you screw up and you mess up and you have to come face Jesus after you've messed up? See, there was this moment shortly after Jesus died. And in fact, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. The moment after Jesus died, right after that, and the days following that, there were no Christians. Peter wasn't like sitting outside the tomb going, oh, this is gonna be good. Here we go. Like, you guys ready for Instagram? Get your filters, let's take a picture of this moment because he's coming back. No, they left. Every one of them. They went back to their old trade because they realized Jesus wasn't the Messiah. He wasn't the one. There were no Christians. There were no followers of Jesus right after his death. And then Jesus comes back. And imagine one of these guys, his name's Peter, and he was one of these followers of Jesus. In fact, he was kind of leader of the 12. He was this hothead. He was always getting himself into trouble and stuff that he said. In fact, when Jesus is being crucified, he rejects that he even knows Jesus. Jesus says, hey, listen, Peter, you're gonna deny me in a few hours, and it's okay. It's gonna happen. Peter's like, I would never deny you. No way, that would never happen. And then he's questioned by this small child, like saying, I think I've seen you with Jesus. And he swears to God that he doesn't know Jesus. And the Gospels record that he makes eye contact with Jesus from across the courtyard, and Jesus looks at him right when that happens, and he's like, oh. Imagine Jesus is dead, and you're Peter. You're at the boat, you're fishing. People said he's come back, but you're like, I'm not buying it. And then Jesus walks onto the shore and says, hey, Peter, why don't you throw your net on the other side of the boat? And it clicks because that's what Jesus told Peter when he first started following, and Peter realizes who it is. Peter jumps in and starts swimming. And I want you to imagine for yourself, like a moment where you majorly screwed up, right? Like you're sneaking in at 3 a.m, right? And you're like coming through the house and you're tiptoeing, and your mom or your dad like flips on that light and they're in the chair and you're like, don't wake the sleepwalker, you know, and you're like trying whatever. You're like, no, this homeless guy needed a meal and he called me and I just was trying to help out. I was just, you know, you're thinking of every lie you can because you know you are busted. So here's Jesus, the first time he sees Peter after Peter royally screwed up. And you know what Jesus does? Jesus makes him breakfast. It's like sitting at the fire. He's like, hey, Pete, you get some fish? Let's have breakfast. Let's eat. And Peter's sitting there and he's eating with Jesus. And the things rolling through his mind right now is just like, what is happening? What? And Jesus just says, hey, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, of course, Lord. Oh, I know I've screwed up. I love you, absolutely. And you know what Jesus says after that? He reminds him of his mission. He says, go feed my sheep. Go do what I've called you to do. Because Peter, I said you were the rock that my church was going to be built on you. So go do your thing, Peter. I mean, because Peter, you love me, right? Peter's like, yes, I love you. Okay, then what are you doing fishing? Get out there. Go do your thing. So if you've screwed up, if you failed Jesus, no matter what you did last night, you consider yourself a Christian, you feel like you screwed up, and you walked into church tiptoeing saying, oh, don't wake the sleepwalker, and you're like, oh man, like I screwed up. God, I'm sorry. And during worship, you just kind of have your head down because you don't know what Jesus thinks. You don't know what God would say. I can tell you what God would say because it's exactly what Jesus said to Peter. And he says, I don't condemn you. You've got a mission in life. Go for it. Like that, we're not here for that. But it's bigger than that though. I mean, Jesus is even more radical than this. And one of what has to be one of the most radical things that Jesus does. You see, because the religious leaders, they want Jesus dead. I mean, if you think about it, if you don't really grasp this, sometimes you're wondering like, why are they so mad at Jesus? Are they just jealous? Are they, why are they so angry? They're so angry at Jesus because how radical he is. They're kicking him out of synagogues. They're trying to stone him. They're saying this guy has gone too far and they want to trap him. Because it looks like, what it appears like, when you look at Jesus' life, it's like, he doesn't seem to be following the Bible. For them, the old covenant, the Torah, the law handed down from Moses. And they're going, it seems like he's disobeying the Bible to let other people in. And they're like, let's find out if this is really true. In fact, there's this command in the Old Testament, and it's found in the book of Leviticus, all of your favorite books. I know you were reading Leviticus this week. And it says this, Leviticus, it says, if a man commits adultery with another man's wife, the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. I mean, this is clear cut, right? Like this is about as clear as it can get what is supposed to happen. So these religious leaders find this woman and they catch her in the act of adultery. I'm not going to explain to you what the act of adultery is because I think you know. And they catch her in the act and they drag her out before Jesus. And this is just an aside. Again, I could rant on this. But this says the adulterer and the adulteress, right? Where's the dude in all of this? Where's the guy? They're like, excuse me, we need her. You can stay right here. And they drag her out to Jesus. And I'm ticked that the guy's not there. But anyway, they throw this woman down at Jesus' feet. They say, what are you going to do? Because Jesus, the Bible says that she has to die. So what are you gonna do now? You're gonna disobey the Bible, Son of God? And Jesus bends down and he starts writing in the sand. Now, here's the thing. We don't know what Jesus writes. There's different speculation. There's different things that different people believe. Some people think he begins to write the different religious leaders' names down and like what sins they did the week before. And they're like, hey, Tom over there, you know what he did last night? And Tom's like, deuces, I gotta go, and like Tom's like leaving or whatever. Like, I don't know exactly what's happening, but Jesus writes something. Starts writing in the dirt, and for whatever reason, all these religious leaders drop the stone and they walk away until it's Jesus and this woman that was caught in the act of adultery. And here's what happens. It says that Jesus, standing up, saw her and said, woman, where are your accusers? Did no one condemn you? Jesus looking around going, where'd they all go? That's weird. Where are your accusers? Haven't some people condemned you to death? Where are they? She responds, no, Lord, she said. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. Now, here's the thing. You know what I've heard a lot in church growing up when I hear this story? You know, the most important thing that I've heard people teach on? Jesus said, yeah, that's right, he did say that, but he said, go and sin no more. You better not, if I catch you in this again, like I'm gonna get you, you better not sin anymore, you better not do that. And what we need to be saying to people that aren't Christians is to go and sin no more, and you better not do this. Because why? Because God's gonna be mad at you, you're gonna disappoint him, and that's the language. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Like you hear this story and your takeaway is go and sin no more? Like that, Jesus just unhitched his philosophy of ministry from the Bible to include people in. And he's saying, I don't condemn you. And you know what? When Jesus speaks, he's speaking for God. God's saying, I'm not going to condemn you. There is still hope and life and opportunity. And the reason he says go and sin no more isn't because I'm going to be mad at you and I'm going to get you if you do this again. Is Jesus is saying, listen, what you're looking for in that bedroom can't be found. The hope, the life, the love, and acceptance you're seeking in another man's arm can't be found there. Don't go back to that. You are worth so much more than that. Don't go and sin like that anymore. There's more to life than that. But yet we want to read it as like, yeah, get him, Jesus. You get her. Jesus is radical. I mean, his approach is just mind-blowing. Like that's why people want him dead, because he's doing things like this. And then, in the ultimate act of display of what the love of God looks like, Jesus is hanging on a cross naked. He's been tortured, he's been beaten, he's been spat on, he's been ridiculed, and he's hanging on the cross, and Roman soldiers are saying things like this to him. They're saying, he saved others, let him save himself. If he's God's Messiah, the chosen one, if you're the King of the Jews, save yourself. They're saying, come on, Son of God, call your dad. Why don't you call some angels down to fix this for you? What are you gonna do, just hang up there? If it was me, I'm sorry, I would not make a good Jesus. If I'm on that cross, at that point I go, okay, I'm done. You know, Michael, Gabriel, let's go, let's do this. You know, like I'll get up there in a minute, take care of sin of the world, but we're gonna rumble. Like these Roman soldiers are going down. Like if that's me, that's what I'm doing. And then I'll go, okay, I'll get back up. You know, like I just had to do my thing, you know. Jesus is hanging on that cross, being ridiculed. And you know what Jesus says? He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Being ridiculed, mocked, spat on after the life he's lived. He says, God, forgive them. You see, this is what God is like. Yeah. This is the God of Jesus. And what I love is John, one of Jesus' closest friends, the one of the only followers not to leave his side, along with the women, because ladies are better. No, just kidding. No, there's Jesus hanging on this cross. John is still there. Jesus' mother is still there. And they watch Jesus say this. And they watch this interaction firsthand. Jesus dies. Years later, Jesus is risen from the dead. John's now an old man. He's a pastor. He's a church planter. And he's writing this letter to the church. And he's seeing the love of Jesus up close and personal. He's writing to people who didn't get to see what he got to see. And he says this. He says, and so we know and rely on the love God has for us. Because of all these reasons, guys, I'm telling you, I saw this firsthand. For all of those reasons, we can know one thing. We can know the love that God has for us. Because this was the love that Jesus had for us. And he goes on. He says this, he says, God is love. And whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. So do you want to know what God is like? You can't go all the way to atheism. You rejected the faith you were handed. You rejected religion that you were given as a child, and that childhood faith couldn't make it through the rigors of adulthood. But you look at atheism and you can't go that far, and you feel stuck in the middle, and you go, what do I do? Because I can't follow this, but I can't go all the way here. I want to present you the Christian God, the God of Jesus. The God of Jesus is a God of love. Here's how we're going to close this out. In a moment, the band is going to play one final song, and I'm going to ask that you all remain seated for this song. And just listen to these words, and I want these words to soak into your head and to soak into your heart and to really think about what's being said. And I love one of the lyrics. It says this. It says, I can see your heart. 8 billion different ways, every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. And that's my prayer, that as we look at the life of Jesus, as we look at how radical his love and his approach was, we would see that every single person on the face of the planet is a child of God. That God sent his son, that Jesus lived his life to love. And our goal is we just want to be more like that. When we look at that, that's so compelling. That's so magnetic. That's so beautiful. I walk away going, I want to be more like that. I fall so short so many times, but I want that. So in a moment, as we close out, I want you to listen, process these words, think about what they say.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark, you fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star is a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath. We're evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky is a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will I. Stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praise still falls short, then I'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you chased down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so that I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I. I can see your heart 8 billion different ways. Every precious one is a child you died to save. You gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
So I'd like to go back to my agenda. Because again, I have an agenda. I would like you to reconsider Christianity. I get it. There's people in this room today that you've rejected Christianity before. You were handed something that just couldn't reconcile with life. You met somebody, you discovered something, you experienced something in life, and you said, the God that I was handed just doesn't work for me today. Or those of you who've never really grown up in a religious home. You're going, man, that's just not my thing. And there's even people in here today that I want to reconsider Christianity, and you'd call yourself a Christian. Say, no, I am a Christian. I follow Jesus. But in an honest moment, when you're real with yourself, you say, the God I follow isn't really the God of Jesus. The Christianity I adhere to isn't the one I see displayed in the life of Jesus. And if I gotta be honest with myself, that's not what I'm really doing with my life. In a moment, I'm gonna give every single one of you an opportunity to respond to that. See, I don't know what I've been doing up to this point, but I want that. Because that Jesus, that's magnetic. That compels me. That's beautiful. I want that kind of life. Well, Jesus stands here today and he's bidding you to come close. He's saying, come on, come and follow me. It doesn't matter what you did last night. It doesn't matter the religion you followed as a child. It doesn't matter any of those things. Come and follow me, you can have this way of life. So what I'm gonna do in a moment, not right now, but I'm gonna give you an opportunity to acknowledge and say, that's me and I want that. In a moment, I'm actually gonna ask you to stand to your feet, saying, I want that. I don't have that, but I want it. And here's the thing, you might be sitting there going, oh, okay, Pastor, like, we're gonna like bow our head and close our eyes though, right? Like, you know, you're not crazy, right? And we're not. I want you to look me in the eye and say, I'm reevaluating Christianity. And what I've been following up till now, I'm a Christian, because here's the thing, there's gonna be people that stand up, that people are gonna look around and go, man, I never expected them to stand up. Their life has been something wild. I never expected that. And then there'll be other people that'll stand up, and the spouse is gonna look over and go, wait, what? But you're a Christian, you already believe this stuff, and it's someone just saying, no, the God I followed up till now is not that God. And I don't want this religion stuff anymore. I want Jesus. So if that's you, wherever you find yourself today, when I say 3, would you stand to your feet? 1, 2, 3. Would you stand? Would you be so bold? Would you be so courageous to stand up and say, I want that. I want that. Yes. Yes. Now look at me. Those of you that are standing, guys, I'm telling you, it takes courage, it takes boldness, but the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live. Jesus said he came to give life and life to the fullest. So culture's gonna say being a Christian is lame. Culture's gonna say it's stupid, it's silly what you did. They're gonna put mind games in your head, but I'm telling you, the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live. Now, I'm gonna give you all an opportunity. Can we do this? Can we all stand to our feet? Can everybody stand up now? Everybody stand up. And one more time, can we give a huge round of applause to everybody who stood up? Now here's the thing. We're not done quite yet, because something happened in the early church. You see, the early church went from nothing to thousands in a matter of a few months. It was so radical. People were hearing the message of Jesus saying, yes, I want that. And then what these early Christians were doing is they say, hey, go public, tell people about it, tell people about this life of Jesus. And they did this thing called baptism. And it was this kind of symbolic symbol of like that old way of living, that old religion, that old Jesus that I thought was real, that I thought I was following. I want that to be dead and gone and be a new creation. Those are the words that these early leaders of the church were saying. And here's the thing. There's this crazy account, and I'm telling you, the early church was just as nuts as Jesus. It's amazing. You know that guy Philip we talked about, who's like, Jesus, I'm not sure about this. I want you to show us God. Well, man, he saw Jesus rise and something changed in him. And God told him, hey, I want you to go south. There's a guy I want you to meet. And Philip goes south and he meets an Ethiopian eunuch. Come on, you don't get any more other in the Jewish world than an Ethiopian eunuch. This is other religion, this is other faith, this is other ethnicity, this is other, we could go on and on and on about the way an Ethiopian eunuch is other. And Jesus said, I want this for him too. So Philip went and he got in his chariot and he started telling him about who Jesus was, and he started reading through these things and he started saying that this church is growing, it's exploding, and I know you're going back to Ethiopia, but as you go, I want you to take this message of Jesus with you. And this Ethiopian guy goes, this is crazy. This is wild. I want to be like this. I'd like to get baptized. And they're riding in the chariot and they see this like water on the side. This Ethiopian eunuch, he says this. He says, what can stand in the way of me being baptized? And you know what Philip says? He says, not a thing can stand in the way of you getting baptized. You see, there's a culture that says, what's going to stand in the way? I don't know. And guess what we have today? We've got a body of water over here. And what a better day we're gonna be celebrating with people that have already signed up to get baptized. But here's the thing, maybe you just stood up and you're going, oh, wait a minute, there's some things that could stand in the way of me getting baptized. I've got my Sunday best on. Is that gonna stand in your way? Because guess what, we also have t-shirts for you. We bought shorts for you just in case. We've got extra towels and I would love it. You don't have to, but if you stood up and you said, I want this new life, that you would do what that Ethiopian eunuch would do. That you would say, what's gonna stand in my way of getting baptized today? Maybe you've been baptized before. I don't care. There's not some ledger of God like, oh, this one's been baptized before, but he didn't mean it, so he's up for a new one. Like, it doesn't matter. This is just a symbolic symbol of like, that old way of living, I want to be dead and gone. And I want this new way of life, this new life of Jesus to be a part of what I believe in. And you know why? Because the God we're talking about, this God of Christianity, this God is love. And if you want that, you've got that. And nothing can stand in the way. So here's what we're gonna do. The band is gonna play one final song. I've gotta change really fast. So I'm gonna run upstairs. If you wanna get baptized, there's time. So if you wanna get baptized today and you're not already signed up, I want you to go to the top of these stairs. Somebody will meet you. They'll give you clothes. They'll let you change. There is time for you still. Here's the thing. Why not? Why not? Why let anything stand in your way today? Where it's gonna be a party, we're gonna celebrate. So the band is gonna play one final song. Let's all give a huge round of applause because God is love.